So, welcome back to SIHH Live, this TV studio in the middle of the Salon de l'Horlogerie, where during the week we are listening to the people of Haute Horlogerie and to their stories and ideas. The first session today is a panel discussion organized with BBC World News on luxury in a changing world. It's going to be led by BBC journalist Zeinab Badawi, and I invite her to take the stage. Zeinab, welcome.
Thank you so much indeed, Leo. Thank you very much, yeah. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. I never thought that wrists would be so interesting, frankly. Instead of looking at people's faces as I've been going around the salon, I've just been looking at their wrists to see what they have on them. And I mean, there have been some marvelous specimens of all the wonderful watchmakers we have here. So we're going to be talking about the luxury industry as a whole, but also specifically talking about luxury watches and just, you know, where the market is for these watches in what we're going to be discussing as a changing world. And I've got a wonderful panel, a couple of people who are going to be with us shortly. But before we do that, we're going to, and actually, by the way, there's also an opportunity for you in the audience here to, you know, give us some comments and ask some questions as well. So you're not just going to be sitting listening. We also expect you to be part of this. But before we have our discussion, I'd like to invite a colleague of mine from BBC Global News, Dr. Hamish McFarlane, who is head of Insight at BBC Global News, because you know what? He's going to be giving you a sneak preview of a really interesting report that's going to be published in the coming days, which is looking at affluent millennials and just, you know, what makes them tick. No pun intended, but of course it was. What makes the affluent millennials tick? What kind of things do they buy? And just how the world is changing in terms of, you know, who is buying, what are they buying, where are they buying it, and are they expecting, you know, new models and innovations and so on. So, Hamish, come and join me. Actually, we're going to swap places, Hamish.
We are.
Yeah.
We are.
So, Hamish, you're going to give us some of the key findings of this report, because you, I think, based your study on about 8 key countries.
That's right, we did, yes. We are really interested in understanding the BBC World News audience. We're in 200 countries around the world. I think one of the things we assumed was that millennials, we all think we know millennials, don't we? We think we know what they're like, and we think that they're a kind of an interesting opportunity, but a troublesome group. They're causing a lot of change. And when we think about a changing world, I think a lot of this is driven by millennials. So we really wanted to get under their skin.
You're right. They are troublesome. I've got 4 millennials of my own children, and boy, are they troublesome. Hamish.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you today. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes just to set the scene a little bit and provide some food for thought for the panel to discuss. As I was saying, as head of Insight at BBC Global News, we're really interested in our audiences, and we always like to understand who our audiences are. And one of the things we discover is that a lot of affluent populations come to the BBC and love to consume BBC News because we're a trusted international news brand. But one of the things we were really curious about was the millennials and these younger generations and how they're consuming their news. Because if you read the news, ironically, I think you might come to the conclusion that they're abandoning traditional news outlets and going to these social media platforms and things like that. And now we have questions about fake news and the reliability of news. So this is something that really occupies the time at BBC World News. So we did some number crunching back in 2016, where we were looking at where millennials got their news, and we found that when you look at the affluent millennial subset, actually they were coming to BBC News more than they were coming to social media. And it comes down to this thing that we had to kind of contend with, which was that when you've got a high degree of critical literacy, and particularly where you have social media spaces where there's all sorts of different sources, and there is a lack of authoritative signalling, of understanding the authority of the message you're getting, you do start to come back to traditional international news providers for a bit of reliability. So as we dug into that, we ended up producing a piece which we called Affluent Millennials. And I'm just going to show you a couple of bits from that. So the first thing is, we produced this study, and I'm going to just give you a sense of 3 interesting things that we learned, and then I'm going to look at how we span that into a small study that we're going to be releasing next week on how affluent millennials engage with luxury brands. So we discovered first 3 things. First of all, when we think we understand millennials and when we talk about them, we think about this group who have a high degree of scrutiny. They love to dig up and find outrageous things about brands and tell them off on the internet, don't they? And we worry as brands about what the millennials may find out about us and where the winds of change may come. One day you're the millennials' darling, and the next day you're a villain. How do we turn this around? And I think a lot of businesses are coming around with this idea, actually, that it's not a case of if you may fall foul of the expectations of millennials, it's just a case of when, and what the hell are we going to do about it when it happens? But what we found, actually, was when you looked at millennials as a group, they weren't that different in some of their characteristics and their traits, about how they engage with brands, about how status conscious they are, about how they conceive of success and luxury and things like that, as some of the older generations. Generation X, that's me, baby boomers. They weren't that different until you looked just at the affluent millennials subset. And we added it up in 2016, and there were about 950 million millennials around the world at that time, but only about 155 million of them would we class as affluent. Now, what do I mean by affluent? Well, we define it according to a particular source that we use that defines affluence as the top 25% of income, household income for your market. Now, looking at some of the watches and the price tags around here, this is a bit of a wider net than buyers of luxury watches. And when we talk about luxury brands, we're going to look at what we would call personal luxury goods, which would be watches, but also bags, clothing, and jewelry and things like that as well. But we found that this affluent millennials subset embodied what we thought we knew about affluent millennials more than the general millennials did. They were very, very brand conscious. They were very, very status conscious. It turned out they were quite money conscious. But then, of course, there was this interesting thread that came in about their values. So we had this idea about being very status conscious, but they had this really interesting dynamic where the brands that they choose to buy are brands that reflect their own personal values and become a way for them to communicate their values to others. I am what I buy. So what does that mean for us? Well, first of all, it means we really need to understand what their value system is. And I'm sure you've seen this before as well. There is a current of earnestness about companies that are responsible, that are ethical, that are sincere. And as a marketer, previously as a marketer, we contend with this idea that for decades we've been looking at what we call the pursuit of cool brands, making everything, as long as we can make it cool, people will buy it. But there is a new level of thinking about how millennials contend with brands. And the idea is that cool isn't enough anymore, because cool is a bit too surface, cool is a bit too ubiquitous. We need to get under cool and understand brands that are sincere, brands that are real. Because when you chip away at cool sometimes, you find out it's just a facade. These are audiences looking for authenticity. But if you can get that, if you can deliver that, there is a high degree of brand loyalty that you can enjoy from this group. So what we did is we, last year and this year, have been running a series of affluent millennial studies to understand how they engage with particular brands. We've done one towards the end of last year on leisure travel. And today I will be showing you the first few little tidbits of information from our new piece on luxury goods, personal luxury goods. The actual full report will be freely available next week. So if you would like a copy, please come and see me at the end, and we'll make sure that we get one sent to you. So affluent millennials and luxury brands. What can we learn about this group? We did a study in 8 particular countries. I'm now going to have to remember them off the cuff. They were America, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Africa, Germany, and France. Whew, can't believe I got through that. 2,700 millennials, and what we wanted to look at is we wanted to understand the millennials, how they think and how they behave and how they engage with luxury brands, and how do luxury brands need to behave and think and exist in a way that will really reach out and engage with affluent millennials. So we talked to these people, and we're going to show just a couple of quick tidbits. I don't want to speak too much because we've got a wonderful panel here that I'd love to hand over to in a few minutes. But one thing I would like to say is that I've given Zeinab a couple of little pointers that she may pop up on the screen from time to time, which are food for thought for the panel to discuss that came out of the report. So one of the things that we started with when we took a look at affluent millennials and luxury brands was dealing with the obvious connotation of success and achievement that luxury brands are all about. When you buy a luxury brand, you were buying a product, you could buy it for a vastly cheaper price if you felt like it. So why do people buy luxury brands? Well, for a long, long time, the industry believes that luxury brands are synonymous with success and achievement. And what some would call the traditional 1950s model of success and achievement looks a little bit like this. The idea is that as you come of age in the 50s and the 60s, the 70s, and even the 80s, there is this idea that you are coming into a time of economic prosperity and the world is your oyster and you will slowly work your way up towards success. And so luxury brands become a marker of these stages that you achieve. When I achieve this stage, I am going to buy a lovely watch. When I achieve this stage, I'm going to get the boat, that kind of thing. And this is something that luxury brands have been aware of for many, many years. But does this apply to millennials? Well, we took a look and we realized there's something a little different about the millennials generation. First of all, the economy. The millennials are the first generation to come of age at a time where the economic prospects are less than those of the previous generation. And this is it may not sound like much, but I think this has a really fundamental impact on how they look at the world. First of all, if you look at my parents, amongst my parents and all their friends, there are lots of stories about people who worked for years and years and years at a single company. My dad worked for 35 years. His friend worked for 40 years at the post office, and they worked their way up to postmaster. And that was the real way of doing it back in the day, wasn't it? You worked and you achieved and you walked your way up. I come from London, and in London, the average tenure of a person in London who works at a single company is 4 years before they move on. These are the younger generations. There isn't that feeling of security anymore for anyone, really. And so we've got the economy to contend with. The idea that luxury brands become a marker for success is very different now if you don't feel that you're going to reach those markers. Secondly, finance. It used to be you would have to save up for your luxury brand. Now, because of evolutions in finance, you can put it on layaway, you can book it, you can finance it. So it doesn't become quite the marker that it used to if you can have the luxury brand before you've earned it. Number 3, globalization. Millennials have come of age at a time when they have more global information around them than ever before, than any of their previous generations. So what's going on the other side of the world is equally as important to them as what's going on here and in their own little part of the world. And so they become earnestly engaged with the activities of the world, and they can receive that information very quickly. And we see this, what we call the outrage economy these days. People getting outraged about things very, very quickly, overnight. Things become persona non grata. And finally, social media. The place in which we have chosen to flaunt our success and achievement has changed. I remember my dad, when he achieved the status that he desired, bought himself a Pontiac, a lovely American car, which cost a fortune to ship to Australia, I might point out, and cost a fortune to fix, we discovered later on. But who was he showing that off to? Well, this is the 80s. He was showing it off to the people on his street. His community of peers, the place where he chose to talk about his success was on his street, wasn't it? The people who would see the car driving, the people who at work who would see him park that car. I'm the next generation. I don't actually care what people think on my street, and I don't really know who they are, to be honest. The people who are in my community are out there online, aren't they? My friends are global citizens. They're in all sorts of different countries and all sorts of different time zones. And this is a real syndrome of millennials. The group that they are projecting their success and achievement is online now. And I'm sure anyone who's gone on Facebook will see everyone's highlight reel. Apparently, we're always perennially on holiday, all of us. We're always at the beach, and we're always showing off our wonderful brands and so forth. No one ever shows a picture of themselves sitting in their pajamas watching Netflix, do they? Everything's a highlight reel on social media. But this has a real impact for millennials on where they choose to project their success and achievement. They do it online. And so what are the implications for brands? This is probably something we'll discuss today with the panel. Okay, I'm going to just take another minute of your time and we'll hand it over to Zeinab and the panel. I'm going to show you just a couple of quick things. We wanted to just see affluent millennials, where they stood in comparison to the affluent of other generations. So we used a Global Web Index, which is a very large international database. It goes back many years tracking these such things. They tracked 17 top luxury brands and purchases of those. And we found that amongst the 8 countries that we were testing, affluent millennials were much more likely to have purchased luxury goods in the past 12 months than Generation X or the baby boomers. So when we sometimes think, when we think about millennials, that they're not an engaged group when it comes to consumerism, actually they are. It's about the rules of that engagement that we need to understand. Secondly, it's not just about purchasing power, but it's above the shoulders as well. These are some attributes that we would look at, that we would understand how they compare to the other generations as well. I'm a brand conscious person. I tend to buy premium versions of a product. So the way they think is much more of a premium luxury nature than their previous generations. We also asked these particular groups, and once again, don't forget, this is about all personal luxury goods, not just watches. What were their predisposition of purchasing and how much they would spend in the last 12 months on luxury goods. And we looked at it by country. And one of the things we were able to figure out was that they were twice as likely, they spent twice as much money on luxury goods in the past 12 months than their non-affluent counterparts. And we were able to see how that looked by each of these particular countries, so that you could see that some had a much more distinct difference. Hong Kong, for instance, was less, and you can see the USA was much more distinct between the affluent and non-affluent in that particular group. And then we asked them how much they're planning on spending in 2018. And on balance across these 8 countries, the plan was 2.5% more. So I think we may have expected, with worries about economy and so forth, maybe they were expecting to spend less. And in some countries, in fact, they were. So we could see France and South Africa dropped a little bit. They were expecting to spend a little less per year. Australia and Germany a bit more bullish. And as I say, we dug deeper and deeper on these things, and we can make these available to you when it comes in next week. So to wrap this up before I hand it back to Zeinab, what does this mean for how they conceive success? One of the particular pieces of analysis that we did was to understand where that career paradigm of success, the 1950s model, sat in the hierarchy. And we found that it was not number 1 anymore. Here it is down here. Success means a long and stable career. And what is above it? Success is having the means to live a healthy and balanced life. Success means the freedom to discover and experience what I like. Success is having the means to make smarter choices about what I buy and my impact on the planet. So the thinking about success has changed for this group. It doesn't mean stable career, markers of my achievement, communication of those markers. Because of the changes in the economy, changes in finance, changes in globalization, and this new social media platform, which is where I communicate my success, we now have a different paradigm. What is luxury and success now? Luxury and success for this group is the flexibility to make mindful choices for themselves and to make mindful choices for others. They can pay a little more if it'll help the planet, and so forth. Really, really interesting, and we've had a lot of fun kind of digging into this, and I look forward to sending it out to anyone who would like to see it. I'm now going to hand it back to Zeinab, and we will see what the panel would like to say about this.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Hamish. And it's probably just worth pointing out what you saw at the bottom there, that your definition of affluent millennials is 16 to 34-year-olds in the top 25% of household income.
That's correct.
Right,
yeah.
Because then you've got another layer of affluent millennials who are...
there are many different types of affluent.
Right at the very top, the sort of top 5%.
Yes, indeed, yeah. So when we say affluent in this particular way, we're talking about the top 25% by household income, but we were able to ratchet that up as well. We have what we call high net worth individuals that are the top 13%, top 10 and top 3.
Right, okay, good. Well, let me invite, please, Françoise Bizola and Stephen Forsey, please, to join us. Françoise, if you sit there, and Stephen, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So, Françoise Bizola is Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Ulysse Nardin. You've only been in position for 3 months at Ulysse Nardin, but you have been in the watch industry for 20 years and in the luxury fashion world as well. So you bring a great deal of experience to this new post of yours. And Ulysse Nardin, I don't have to remind you, has been making watches since 1846. So been around a long time. Very nice to see you. And Stephen Forsey, a fellow Brit, born in St Albans in Hertfordshire, and was very influenced by his father when he was growing up, because your father was fascinated by mechanics and that kind of thing, and you inherited that from him. Exactly. And then you had a stellar career at Asprey's, where you were in the watch restoration department, and then decided to come to the epicenter of watches, Switzerland, and you learnt more about your watchmaking craft there, and you met Robert Greubel, and in 2004 you set up Greubel 4C, and they make some marvellous watches, and it's worth looking at Stephen's one here. As I said, I've been going around inspecting all these watches. So listening to what Hamish had to say, Françoise, I mean, how do you see the affluent millennials? We won't talk about them for the whole time, but just in terms of this younger generation of consumers.
Actually, I don't see them much different than what I was 20 or 30 years ago. I'm not sure they are so different. I think what is different is where you find them. It's digital. It's the fact that they are. I mean, me at that time, you could find me as a consumer in the shop, and in the shop only. The difference is you can find them on digital. You can find them everywhere, actually, because they are not only on digital. They are omni-channel. They want to be in the shop and to look at the phone at the same time. So this is the difference. This is where you find them.
The means of communicating with them, not the values or the reasons that they buy.
You know, the big thing is to say now experience. They want experience rather than possession. You know. Well, honestly, when I was 20 years old, I also wanted to go to Thailand for 6 months rather than having a bag. So I don't think they're so different in terms of values. You know.
Right. Okay. And you, Stephen? I mean, how do they impinge on your thinking?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, the millennials generation have this incredible access to information. When we were younger, if you wanted to know something, you only had books as reference points. So you had a whole process of searching. Today, you can click on the internet anywhere around the world and access an incredible and ever-expanding base of information. So
again, it's the access to this pool of potential consumers.
And certainly they're at least as intelligent as we were and we are. But they do have a different approach because this technology is so integrated to their life. You know, they've grown up with it. I see that with my children as well. You know, they have this technology. It's there the whole time. So they're really on board with that, but they want to go into more. They want to go into detail as well. So it's very
But you mentioned technology, and so do you think that that is going to have an influence on the watchmaking, on the luxury watches, and that you're going to have watches which are more technological, more technical, maybe? I mean, because they're all quite traditional. Well, maybe something that will tell you not quite the, you know.
There are different categories today. Actually, I think you know, when I went to study watchmaking in the mid-80s in London, the watchmaking industry was in crisis. You know, just barely surviving. The mechanical watch industry, it's managed to reinvent itself, and as it's done that, there's the electronic watch. There's the mechanical watch with all of the spheres, many of which are here these days in Geneva. And then we have a new sort of connected technology, which I wouldn't really call a watch myself as a watchmaker, because it does so many different things. It occupies a space on a wrist, left or right.
Emails or whatever.
Exactly. So this is another category of technology, I think, and a different connection.
Are the luxury watchmakers going to ignore that, or do you think they will respond to that to get a younger consumer?
You cannot actually ignore it, because, I mean, it's a success. I mean, Apple, I mean, we don't know exactly the figures, but apparently it's at least 20 million watches they sold. So it's anyway a success. You cannot ignore it. But at the same time, you need to be, I mean, first, I think you have to make the difference between a device and a watch. I think a connected watch is a device. A watch, it's really more than you know, giving you information. It's mechanical. It's the beauty of craftsmanship, and I think that the study you did also showed a lot that affluent millennials are really still very interested by craftsmanship and. So, I mean, we have to stick to these values.
You're going to stick to that. You're not going to start making the device in addition to the traditional mechanical watch.
At least not at the level of prices we are,
It's not something that's discussed in the industry.
Some watch companies, they do see that they want to access there, maybe with their positioning and their volume and their market. But it's true, certainly, I think, for most of the brands here, and I think goes for Ulysse Nardin, for Global 4C very much, is we're about artisan work. And so the affluent millennials are interested in what we do because of the artisan and a true luxury. And luxury traditionally was fine craftsmanship.
Right.
And so fine craftsmanship, artisans working to create the very best of whatever it is.
Right.
And so this authenticity is really
exactly.
important.
That's the word I wanted to say. I think authenticity is really a key value for
So they'll satisfy
affluent
their kind of technological devising in other ways.
Yeah, and they can make the difference.
Yeah.
And it would be difficult for us to then branch into that region because that device technology is in such a, it's such a different business.
World, yeah. Interesting. Hamish, I mean, you've also done research as to, the reasons why affluent millennials buy what they want to buy. Maybe you could just, because I think you've got a couple more slides on that.
Yeah, I'll just grab this little piece here. Yeah, I mean, we really did want to know why affluent millennials buy luxury brands. Are they the same reasons as previous generations? So we may assume craftsmanship, quality of materials, excellence and all of that would be their top scorers. And I'm happy to say they were. So when it came to affluent millennials, what they were looking for in luxury brands was still craftsmanship. I'll see if I can just get this slide up. Is that the one there? Quality materials, design and craftsmanship were still the most important features of a luxury brand. However, they were much more likely than the general population to look for brands that had a conscience, had a value system that reflected their own. So going back to that point I made before, that they purchase brands as a communicator to others of their value system. I was really curious what luxury brands think about this particular idea. Brands that have a personality, an identity, and a value system. But
it's interesting, though, it bears out what both of you were saying, that quality materials, design and craftsmanship are the most important features of luxury brands.
Yep.
They knew the research before you put it out.
It's nice when the research matches the business.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, we live it, I think.
You live it, so you realise that. But it's nice to have it endorsed, isn't it?
Well, it's fantastic to see that perhaps we are on the right path.
Yes. And what were the other reasons?
Well, actually, one thing I was just thinking about, I'm trying to get my head around this. You only really wear one watch at a time, although one of my friends was wearing two today. She had her lovely watch on and her Fitbit. And I thought that looked a bit funny. So I thought, okay, that's not normal. Normally we'd have one watch at a time. And so I was thinking about, we've got these different categories of watches now. Surely there's this worry now about luxury watches and other categories trying to find their way onto people's wrists. Because if I take off my Fitbit and walk around all day, I don't get to count my steps anymore. And I feel like there's this black hole in how many steps I did that day.
How can you talk about Fitbits when we've got, Global 4C and Ulysse Nardin, for God's sake?
I know indeed. But then I sort of contend with this idea that, and once again, I'm not a luxury watch owner by any means, but if you have a luxury watch, it is not an everyday companion, is it? You put it on to take it out for particular occasions and so forth.
That's an interesting point, because I think one of the things that our collectors is that they want to experience it. Traditionally and historically, especially complicated watches, which mean a lot of mechanism, many hundreds of parts inside and requiring a lot of work, these were sort of objet d'art. There was something, certain fragility and so forth. Today, the affluent millennial wants something. He wants this luxury. He wants to be robust.
Yeah.
He wants to be able to wear it, enjoy it, and experience it.
Yeah.
And some of our collectors, why not?
Thinking one of my millennials.
But they want to experience it. So it's emotion, it's the experience, and they want to be able to enjoy that. And we see our collectors wearing their complicated pieces quite often.
Right.
But there is this question of it, and it's been called the sort of real estate of the wrist. Some of our collectors wear a nice mechanical watch on one wrist, and they've got their technology on the other.
Interesting.
Because there's a bit. So there's an aspect about the technology, and it's this connectedness. And so as we go on as humans, I think we all see this. You get caught in this technology to a point where it completely invades your whole life and existence.
Yes.
And so there is also an element where you want to take away that technology and be off, and there's this sort of slow down
Yes,
approach,
yes, go
and,
slow.
and be off the connected aspect for a while.
I was going to say to you, Françoise, that obviously for a brand like Ulysse Nardin, yours is much newer, obviously, heritage, you would think, would play quite a part in your kind of, sales pitch by saying we've been around for such a long time, we know how we do things. And I just wondered what you thought of heritage, and also to ask you, Hamish, whether that was something that registered with the affluent millennials. Does actually heritage matter to them?
Well, I think heritage is yes, it's important because it's what we are made of. So, I mean, what is important with heritage is to be true to this heritage. It's not to talk about heritage only, it's to innovate inspired from the heritage. So always talk about heritage when you are introducing an innovation which is inspired by this heritage. And I think it's what defines yourself. So it's important, but it's not as important as, by itself. It's important because it defines your values, and you have to be true to this heritage.
Interesting. Did you
I'll
uncover?
put the slide up. So this is really interesting what you're saying, and I think it matches this quite well. So what we found here was actually millennials enjoyed heritage and appreciated it, and the history of a brand, and they would look, towards brands that had a great history and heritage. But when you looked at the affluent millennials, it was a little down the hierarchy, but for a different reason, I think, than what you were saying. So I don't think it invalidates what you're saying at all. The thing they were most interested in is, and it's written here, access to a like-minded community of owners of the product. What does that mean? It means the ownership of the product is only one part of the brand experience. They are an owner of the product now. And I'm really curious about your experience. You were saying that you've got, was it 40 or so collectors that you would interface with? A very small user group.
No, yes, I mean, our group of collectors is in the hundreds, actually, probably.
Right.
And we know quite a lot of them, actually, personally, and it's that exchange with the creator, with the artisan. They want to visit, they want to, they want to understand, and they want to, it's true, it's a sort of a circle, and today they can link across the internet, and we see, SIHH this week, so there's going to be quite a lot of collectors, hundreds of collectors who, from different companies, are going to come here and they're going to get together. And so in the evening, you see them in a restaurant or in a cafe or bar or whatever to get together, have a group and to exchange. And so it's a sort of
the purest form of
it's a virtual
this,
club, but
the
a
purest
worldwide
form of it, where they've got a direct relationship with the manufacturers.
Absolutely.
That is the ultimate experience of being a luxury brand owner, I think. And I think that bigger companies, big chains and so forth, have to try and find that authenticity in a way that it would become so easy for yourself, I think.
To sum up then on the affluent millennials, what would you say is the key message, the final message that you have?
This is maybe a provocative little point that I came up with, but I'd love to start a debate about this. We still find this thread about any kind of category, a real desire for accountability, companies that have sustainable practices, fair working conditions. These are things that a millennial is really interested in when it comes to brands. And I took this and I looked at some of the other bits of data, and one of the things I came away with, a small conclusion, was that maybe the problem with heritage and talking too much about your history gives the impression that you're not agile enough to cope with the new changes and demands of sustainable companies. Now, if you're a small brand, I don't think it's a particular problem. If you're a large, old brand, and of course we think about this in all sorts of other sectors, large, old banks versus little banks and so forth, maybe the millennials doubt that very large, old brands that talk about their history a lot have the agility to be sustainable and accountable brands for them right now.
Did you have another slide?
Only one last point to make, which was very interesting to me. We were asking them what was the most influential factor in their purchasing of and choosing of a luxury brand, and distinct personality was number one. They were looking for brands that had a personality, and this started to make sense when I thought about it a little while, which was really that if we go back to this idea that I am what I purchase, that the luxury brands that I purchase are a reflection of my values system, Once again, that point you made about heritage driving authenticity, I think is really, really important and actually does play into this. Then what we're really asking for is brands to be able to project that, which is a distinct personality.
Does that strike a chord with you, with your, I mean, this is about the luxury industry as a whole, but in terms of watches that have a distinct personality, because you have people who want a bespoke, unique piece,
Absolutely,
don't you?
Yes. Yeah, I think there is, you know, there in the affluent millennials and the affluent consumer, there's this desire, of course, to identify with the story. They want that authenticity, so they want to know where the materials come from, that there's a, you know, an accountable process there. But there's this own personalization is something that we see even Global 4C. We can make 100, just about 100 timepieces a year in our workshops. We call it a workshop rather than a factory. We're very much on the artisan side, but even within that, there are 8 different models, so that's a different model is a different mechanism. But each of those, quite often, I would say a quarter of those are going to be the collector who would like to personalize something and make it his own special story, you know.
And that's the same with you at Zeinab.
I think, yeah, the idea is to offer something which stands out.
Yes.
And which is distinctive, and I think this is what they are looking for. I mean, someone who wants to just have a status symbol at the wrist, he will go for a Rolex. So, I mean, the idea is really to offer something different.
Yes. I mean, one aspect of Hamish's research, which, you know, wasn't covered, is the fact that, of course, the Chinese luxury consumer accounts for a vast amount of the market, the luxury goods industry, and that is growing also, so that possibly by the end of the year there are going to be more millionaires in China than anywhere else in the world, and they're going to be increasingly difficult. I mean, we do see some ebbs and flows depending on what's going on in the country, but in terms of the Chinese consumer and their significance, I mean, they are really very keen to be to not just buy a watch, but to be part of the experience. They'll come to Switzerland to purchase it, not get it from somewhere else. They want to be at the heart of, you know, the watchmaking industry. So maybe just a comment on the Chinese consumer, whether you see them, you know, whether their world is changing and it's going to have an impact on luxury
they used
industry.
to buy a lot abroad when they were traveling, yes, but now I think that they are more and more buying in China. First, because all the luxury brands have developed a network in China, so they can access to the luxury goods where they are in China.
Really? So they're not wanting the experience of coming here.
They still buy when they are traveling, but they are more and more buying inside China.
Right.
And the second thing is that, I mean, we have, 10 years ago, some brands were doing very small watches for Chinese wrists, and they were having a production which was dedicated to China. And in fact, Chinese, they don't want to have, but they want to buy a Swiss watch because it's a Swiss watch, not because the Swiss brand is doing a Chinese watches for them. So they are buying a luxury brand for what it is. So we should not compromise to Chinese tastes. And I think that the Chinese taste really evolves right now. And I think that's true. Before they loved very, very traditional watches. But now they are daring more and more, especially affluent millennials. They are daring more and more. And so they are looking for something which is also different.
Very different, yes. You on the Chinese market?
Yes, it's it's something we know. We have a number of collectors in China, but for Global 4C it's very difficult to have a physical presence because the first tier, second tier cities, we wouldn't be able to be present in all of them. But they certainly they are able to access at different levels thanks to also digital supports. And as François said, they don't want a Swiss watch that looks Asian necessarily.
There has been some of this customization of Rolls-Royce being customized with red leather and dragon motifs for the Chinese market.
Well, that's probably that may be to order. You know, you've always got the consumer who wants to have something that's perhaps a little surprising to us. You know, even for Global 4C, a red strap on one of our timepieces is, for us, is quite exotic. You know, so
have you had that request?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Well, we made it in the end, but
dragons
you know,
so
we
far,
had to.
no dragons so far.
We had to sit down for a while, you know, but we made it. So there is that. But they're definitely fascinated by craftsmanship and this sort of thing, and but over the last 15 years probably they've traveled a lot to Europe because there was so much for them to discover. As Francois says, today, you know, they're perhaps taking a break or visiting different places, and but yeah, of course, I mean, you know, with what, 1.3 billion population in China, is super important.
But other parts of the world important? I mean, we sometimes hear about, you know, affluent Indians, but I mean, India is known for having a very large internal market and being very influenced by their own products, and they have their own kind of status symbols within. So, I mean, other areas of the world which are significant?
Absolutely. I mean, for what we do, when Mr. Grobel and myself created our first watch and launched in Basel World almost 15 years ago now, we didn't know if there were any collectors who would be prepared to invest and support us for a six-figure sum for a handmade, hand-built or timepiece, which was innovative and so on. And our message and story is about hand craftsmanship and finishing and polishing in the tiniest detail, which is very specialized. And so we've discovered that this consumer exists, and across the world. So 40 countries we're represented, and
really? And the Arab world is always traditionally a big market for luxury watches or luxury goods in particular. That's still the case today. The Arab world.
The Middle East.
Middle East.
Okay. Yes, of course. I think that probably maybe in the coming years, Africa, we're going to think a little bit more about Nigeria and this kind of country.
Definitely, the Middle East traditionally was for watches was more of a gem set sort of approach.
Diamonds,
you know, there was quite a lot of this, and it's something where really in the last certainly 10 years since we started to be present in that region, we've seen an incredible evolution in terms of their passion and enthusiasm for technical side of
changing
watchery.
taste.
So yeah, it's really,
we're talking
really
about
developed, and it goes with that. I think with Hamish's study of authenticity, credibility, wanting to know much more about it. So there is the label of a luxury good, of luxury goods, but what's behind it? What's the story? Is it modern? We can create something today because we're here. We can express and talk about that. A historic brand has that possibility to use their and build on their heritage.
Because we're talking about luxury in a changing world. So you've touched on the fact that, you know, who is buying the luxury goods, as you say now, you know, Africa, particularly Nigeria, has got to be on the radar, and people's changing tastes. And we've also touched on the fact that the way people buy luxury goods perhaps is also changing. So I think at the moment it's something like 7% of luxury goods are bought online, but in 3 years' time, that's expected to reach 15%. So, I mean, I wonder if that's another aspect of a changing world, the way in which people purchase their luxury goods.
Yeah, I think e-business will grow for sure.
Yeah.
I've just been living 3 years in United States, and I can tell you it's crazy. I mean, the way you behave totally changes because, I mean, you do everything online. I mean, but what I think the real future is again, it's omni-channel. For example, you buy online, you pick up in store, especially for very high-end timepieces like ours. I mean, you need at a certain moment to have a contact. So you buy online and then you go in store because you want to have the explanation. You have to get the guarantee. You want to understand how it's working. And I think it's really this omni-channel thing we should develop as brands.
Sorry, I thought I had a bit more time, but we haven't got any time for questions. Very quickly, Dr. May Yamani. Just the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is May Yamani. I wanted to go back to the, particularly the Gulf Arab. And we know the stories, like starting when the oil money, like in the 50s, that the King Saud would shake hands with one person and then offer with the other hand a Rolex watch. So the definition of their new economic status and the consumerism was based on coming to the West to buy, and that's a status symbol. How much as Françoise, you're saying, the definition of being your own brand and your tradition, and how much research is done into their requirements and modifying the subject. We mentioned China and other countries. I keep quiet.
Final point from you on that, Françoise, or Stephen, whoever wants to, and then we must stop. Yeah.
Well, yes, there was traditionally this aspect. You go for a very iconic design or label, and so certainly for what we do, and I think wider in the watch industry, there's always studies and always looking to try and gather information and see if we need to adapt, but we're a little bit different. But I think across the industry, you have to be more sensitive, and we can get information about the customer today. So,
Stephen Forsey from Groibel Forsey, thank you very much indeed, and Françoise Bizola from Ulysse Nardin.
Thank you, Zeinab.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And Hamish, my colleague. And by the way, my wrist is available to road test any watches that
we're going to work on it.
For sure. Back to Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeinab. Thank you to the panelists. The test will be time limited, though. It's a watch; it counts the time. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to those who are watching online. This ends this session. The next one is at 12 p.m. Geneva time. I'm going to have the CEO of Maison Piaget as a guest, Nouri Chabi, for an interview right here in the studio. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. I'm sorry.